Welcome. This lesson is to introduce you to the complex numbers, which all complex numbers can be written in the form of a plus bi, where both a and b are real numbers, and I is the complex part, where, if you haven't heard before, I equals the square root of -1. So now when we get to quadratics, we're going to eventually get to a point where we have to square root negative numbers, and we want to be able to square root them. Sometimes these complex numbers don't have what's called, because they call the a the real part and the bi the complex part because it has the I attached to it. Sometimes we don't have the a part, and real numbers don't have the bi part to it. But real numbers are actually considered complex because it'd be 0i. So again, I'm going to show you just a couple really quickly here. You could have like 2 plus 3i. That's a complex number. Real part of 2, complex part of 3i. You could technically have 5 plus 0i. Well, do you need to write the 0i? No, but that just lets you know that 5 actually falls into the category of complex numbers. You could have 0 plus 7i. So 7i is a complex number, and the real part of it is 0. By the way, they don't have to be integers. You can have 2/3 plus 1/4 I. You can even have square roots. You could have like 1/7 plus the square root of 3i. The main thing you wouldn't do is ever leave it the square root of -3. The negative you would bring out as an I, and I'm going to explain that here in just a minute. So let's look. Again, if you don't have this written down, I'd write this down right here so you can remember. As you go to do this IXL assignment, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to say, all right, so I'm doing this first one now. I have a negative, and then what is the square root of -1? You need to get to the very basic understanding that the square root of -1 is I. So the answer would be a negative I because there's a negative on the outside. So you just type in negative I. Now here we have a negative square root of -49, so negative square root of -49. Well, I know what the square root of 7 is, or 49 is. It's 7. But the square root of the negative is I. Don't think these negatives cancel. Just like on the first problem we just did, they don't, because you have to square root that negative, gives you I, and then we have the negative that's sitting out front. So a negative square root of -49 would be a -7i. -7i. Again, here, this one should actually be fairly simple. Square root of 36 is 6. The square root of the negative is I. Again, this one, you're actually going to, that's why they give you the square root button here, is I don't know what the square root of 6 is, but I do know what the square root of the negative part of it is. The square root of this negative is going to be I. I don't know what the square root of 6 is, and then there's a negative out front. So you'll actually type in a negative square root of 6. Now be very careful here. Make sure you tab out. See how I'm going back and forth next to the 6? Don't put the I underneath. That would be incorrect. Putting that I right there. You need to bring the I on the outside and put it on the outside of the square root. Again here, same exact thing. Negative square root of 3. Make sure you arrow over out from underneath the square root and put your I value. Now here is the first one we get to that has both a real and a complex part. So we have that 2 plus the square root of -15. Well, that's 2 plus square root of 15 doesn't reduce at all, as far as there's no factors of 15 that can be square rooted except the negative. I can square root that and get an I. So I'd actually type in 2 plus the square root of 15 and arrow out from underneath and hit I. Same thing here. 10 plus the square root of 14, then arrow out from underneath the square root and hit I. Here, same thing. -7 minus the square root of 7, and then arrow out from underneath and hit I. You're giving me a bunch of these. 17 minus the square root of 5, arrow out from underneath, I. Here's the first one that actually can be reduced a little bit as far as if you forgot how to reduce square roots. Minus the square root of negative 18, well, minus the square root of a negative 1, of a 9, and a 2. 9 times 2 is 18. I can square root the 9. That gives me 3 on the outside. I can't square root the 2. I'll leave that underneath. The square root of the negative 1 is an I, and then I had that negative sitting out front. So I get negative 3 square root of 2, arrow out from underneath, and I. Same thing here. 12 is a 4 times a 3. I can square root the 4. So I get negative square root of 4 is 2. I leave that factor of 3 underneath, and I square root the negative out as the I. Same thing here. I have that leading negative. I have a factor of 27 that's 9 that can be square rooted to a 3. Then I have left underneath the square root the third 3, because 27 is 3 times 3 times 3. So the 2 3's that multiply give you 9 come out. The 1/3 3 stays underneath. And then I'm going to arrow out from underneath, and the square root of the negative is I. So this one, we got 5 square roots of 3, arrow out from underneath, I, because 75 is 25 times 3. Square root of 25 is 5. This one, we're going to have a negative 2 square root of 2, arrow out from underneath, I. This one, 54 is 9 times 6. Square root of 9 is 3. Square root of 6 doesn't break down any further. Then square root of the negative is I. Here we have 13 plus, and we can't combine the 13 with the 3 because when we square the 9, that square root the 9, when we square root it, we do get a 3, but when we square root the negative, we also get an I, and those are not like terms. The real part's 13, and then there's the 3i that I'm adding afterwards. Don't accidentally combine the 13 and the 3 if there's an I next to the 3 and not the 13. So same thing here. We have the negative 12 minus, well, the square root of 100 is 10, but the square root of the negative is I. So we have a real part and a complex part. Again, we have a negative 18. We have plus. Now 93, I believe, is 3 times 31. Yep, and 3 and 31 are both prime. It doesn't reduce. So we actually leave the whole 93 underneath, but we do square out the negative as an I. 6 minus the square root of, well, actually, I might be able to pull something out of 68. 68, it's 2 and 24. Oh, yeah, we got some stuff in here. So 24 is 4 and 6, but the 6 is 2 and 3. So it looks like we're going to have 68 is actually 16 times 3. 30, no, it's not 16 times 3. 2 is 34, not 24. 34. I almost multiplied wrong. Now I factor out a 2 of that, and that's 117. So it's 4 times 17. I can square root the 4. Square root of 4 is 2. The square root of 17, I don't know. The square root of the negative is I. Again, 9 plus the square root of 484. Well, let's see, that's 4, and then it's 121. Yeah, 121, which is 11. So 11 and 2 is 22. So it's 22i. Negative 10 minus, Again, square root of 272. Well, it's divisible by 2 for sure, which is 134. 134. That's not right. 136. 136. So that would be 272. Yep, 136, which is also divisible by 2. Well, you can't see what I'm writing on my paper, which is also divisible by 2, which is going to be 68, which is also divisible by 2, which is going to be 34, which is also divisible by 2, which is 17 again. So it looks like it's going to have a 4 on the outside. Square root of 17, and then make sure I arrow out from underneath an I. Minus 16, not 18, 16, plus 108. 108 is divisible by 2, that's 54, which is a 9 and a 6, but I'm going to pull the 6 with the 2, so that's going to be a 4 times a 9 times a 3, or 36. So it's going to be 6 square roots of 3, 6 square roots of 3, and the negative is the I. Square root of 136. I thought I did 136 somewhere. 136, that's 2 and 60. 68, that's 2 and 34, that's 2 and 17, so it's 2 square roots of 34, 2 square roots of 34, and then the I. Okay, square root of 16 is 4, minus the square root of negative 16 is 4i. I like that one. I wish they'd give us more of those ones. And look, they are doing that. So we have a negative 2, square root of 4 is 2, and it's negative, minus square root of negative 4 is 2i. Okay, so we have a negative 80. 80 definitely has some factors that are square rootable. 4 times 20, which is 4 times 5. So 16 times 5 is 80. Square root of 16 is 4. So we get 4 square roots of 5 plus 4 square roots of 5. And that second one has the I on the outside because it was a negative underneath. Here we go. 43 is, I believe, prime. So it's just square root of 43 minus square root of 43 with an I on the outside because so only thing we can do is square root that negative. Again, same thing here, except I want to make sure 95, which is divisible by 5, leaving a 1, and 45 would be 19. Yep, so that doesn't reduce, so it's literally that. Square root of 95, not 96, minus square root of 95, and I on the outside. If you have any questions, please do bring them to class. What did I do? Square root of 95 plus square, oh, I put a 96, huh? And you notice they put the I in front. That's perfectly fine. I put it behind it and accepted it. It put it in front. And that might actually be nicer because then you don't get ever confused that it's underneath the square root. If you have questions, let me know, and I will help you when you get to class.